when the Torah speaks about appointing judges and establishing this whole infrastructure, law enforcers, it says Mishpat Tzedek, and they will judge the people a judgment of which is righteous. So Rashi cites the Sifri, which is Gemara also. Mani dayonim mumchim betzadikim lishbos tzedek. You should appoint judges that are experts, fully proficient in this area. In addition, that tzadikim. Lishbos tzedek. So they should be qualified to give verdicts which are righteous verdicts. Meaning, if you appoint somebody who's not really on par, he's not up on his game, let's say knowledge-wise, even though he believes that his verdict and his evaluation, his analysis is correct, but it's not, because the judge is not qualified to be in the position to render such rulings, such verdicts. And even if he is qualified knowledge-wise, but if in terms of his level of observance, his Yiras Shamayim, his belief in Hashem and his spiritual conscience, he doesn't have it. But also it's not going to help any. So it's a combination. The only way you're able to have a Mishpat Tzedek, the Dayanim have to be mubchim, they have to be really experts in this area. In addition, they have to be tzadikim. If they're not tzadikim, it's not going to work. Because if they have any conflicts of interest, any sense of whatever it may be, for instance, I'll give you the Gemara. The Gemara tells us in two locations that a dayan who's done din emes labito, a judge who renders a judgment which is truthful on the ultimate level of truth, he becomes Hashem's partner in creation. So Tosas asks, what does the Gemara mean, emes lamito? Don din emes, it's a truthful, just verdict, it's enough. What's din emes lamito? Din emes lamito means that even if you meet all the criteria of evidence, you interrogate the witnesses, and you meet all the protocols of whatever it may be, which is necessary to issue this verdict. But if the judge has a sense there's something not right, he has to withdraw. And he says, I can't rule on this, because it doesn't seem right. Even though everything on paper meets all the prerequisites that he's permitted to issue a verdict. We find that Shimon Sunni, who was a colleague of Rabbi Akiva, he interpreted every S in the Torah. His lifetime's treatise was to explain every S in the Torah. S is always an adjunct to whatever it's associated with. And when he came to the Pasuk of Es Hashem Elohecha Tiro, you should fear Hashem, revere Hashem. That means there's an adjunct to fearing God. Hashem wants you should revere someone the equivalent of fearing him. So Shimon Amsudi said, just as a deserving reward for Drisha, for interpretation, it was his whole life's work. At this moment, I'm going to withdraw, and I understand now all my interpretations were incorrect. Because who could be the equivalent of Hashem? That Hashem wants you to revere someone else, the equivalent of himself. Do you know what it means? Invest a whole life's work in something. And then when you realize that there's a problem, you're willing to withdraw. You know what level of tzaddik you have to be here. Somehow you're going to finagle it, you're going to convince yourself and come up with some kind of interpretation. Because otherwise, your whole life's investment turns out to be worthless. Worthless. So how do you say, as I deserve reward for Drisha, for interpretation, I receive reward for withdrawing? It's not simple. Person meets all the protocols of the court. Interrogation, evaluation, analysis, everything. After everything's said and done, the judge has a sense there's something not right. It's emes, but it's not emes la mito. It's not at the ultimate level of truth. On paper, everything's right. It'll pass anybody's test. But that's not Mishpat Tzedek. You need tzadikim. Only the tzaddik is that level that although he invested everything, if he has to withdraw, whatever he has to give up, he gives up. Because the process, everything about his life is doing the right thing. But if that component of tzaddik is not there, although he's fully proficient and qualified knowledge-wise, he doesn't make the grade in terms of being a qualified judge to issue verdicts in this context. Sanhedrin that, there was a time you had no judges weren't ordained any longer. And they said that even an ordinary person, as long as he's knowledgeable to a degree, he's qualified to be a judge. Person's a businessman and he's an upright person, although he doesn't have the ordination, he's qualified to adjudicate a case, but it's rabbinical. His qualification, why? Because on the Torah level, to be able to give a ruling, halacha ruling, you have to have smicha. You have to be ordained from Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, who would be the one who would give smicha? Who would give smicha? Rabbi Yehuda Nossi. Judah the prince, he himself, only a person who had this ordination was qualified to ordain someone else. And his ordination, if you trace it back to Sinai, each person who ordained the next one himself was ordained initially by Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you ordained and you could trace it to the source, you qualified to render certain rulings, penalty, malchus, even the death penalty. But they saw a person would borrow money, and then he had a claim against the other person would lend money. He couldn't bring it to court. There weren't enough dayanim, people ordination, to adjudicate the cases. So what happened? People stopped lending money. If you can't collect, you stop lending. And it was such a backlog. So they went and they legislated that even ordinary people, person's a business person, as long as he has an understanding of the ins and outs of business and he's an honest man, he's qualified. But on Torah level, he's not qualified. See, that's where the concept of hefker bes nefker comes into play. That the Chazal have the ability that even though on a Torah level, normally the ruling has no value, but they're able to actually to transfer money, condemn property, and allocate money to sources or locations or people, even though at Torah level, they're not really qualified to receive it, or they're supposed to receive it, but they're able to transfer this. Hefker bes nefker. Interrogating witnesses. To be able to make it through interrogation, it was very rare you made it through interrogation. They're both witnesses. There was no discrepancy to any degree between the two testimonies. So what happened? The person would lend money. Then he claimed, the borrower says, I never borrowed. He'd take him to court. They'd interrogate the witnesses. They never made it through the interrogation. What happened? People stopped lending money. If that's the story, I lend and I can't collect, I don't lend any longer. So conventional tinel deals with the law not to close the door in the face of the borrowers. Yeah, you can't run a society unless there's capital available. If people stop lending, there's total breakdown of society. So they went and they suspended the law of interrogation. That witnesses are qualified to testify, even if they're not terrified, even if they're not interrogated. But again, on Torah level, this is not bona fide evidence. Unless the witnesses are interrogated, it's not sufficient. Hefker bes nefker. So hefker bes nefker intervene on two levels. Firstly, establishing judges which are not qualified on the Torah level. In addition, the witnesses, which only are considered bona fide evidence after interrogation, even if they're not interrogated, as long as the judges don't see a problem, they're what? We accept them as evidence, and that's sufficient to be able to issue a verdict based on that testimony. There's a law that if a person forces a woman into marriage, he puts in a room and says, look, unless you marry me, I'm not letting you out of the room. And she only consents to marry him because he put her in a position she had no choice but to say yes. So the Gemara says, above Basra, on the Torah level, even though the consent was under duress, but since he gave her something of value to marry her, it's considered a valid marriage. However, Chazal, they went and they annulled the marriage. So the Gemara asked, how did they annul the marriage? She said yes, he gave her the money, and he intended to marry her. On that, the Gemara says that you only can marry a woman if the item of value you give to her belongs to the man who's marrying her. What about if he takes the item, belonged to a third party? It's not his ring. It's not his coin. and he gives it to her, she's not married. So what do Chazal do? They say if a woman is married under duress, we take the money he gives her, we consider it not his money. So if it's not his ring, it's not his coin, it's not his item that he gives to her, it's not a marriage. So by relying on the principle hefker bes and hefker, by condemning the money, saying the money is no longer hers, his, therefore that's how they annul the marriage. And this is applied in many situations. Like I gave you an example. The judges are not qualified on the Torah level. Nevertheless, we accept their verdict. And it's not considered the one who receives it that he's taking something he has no right to take. Because hefker bes and hefker. The witnesses are really not sufficient evidence because they were interrogated. Doesn't make a difference. But since otherwise you can have a collapse of the whole financial system, and you can't have a society without an economy, therefore they employ the principle of hefker bes and hefker. The evidence is accepted, is sufficient, and the judges, although they're not qualified on the Torah level, their verdict is accepted as a verdict.
And that's the same thing that's or part of that is what's employed in
Mishpat. You should not sway the judgment, meaning you throw the case to one person. Usake ponim. You should not acknowledge one person over the other. Person is wealthy, you treat him differently than the person who's poor. Because the moment you treat one defendant differently than the other, the Gemara says, the other person feels that, it's a lost cause. He doesn't really present his position correctly because he gives up, because he feels that the judge is favoring one of the people, the other person. Therefore, you should not, let's see Rashi, losati mishkamashmo, losaka ponim, apishas hatainus. Even when they're presenting that case, he shouldn't be soft to one and sterner with the other defendant. One defendant he allows to sit, and the other person says must stand. Because when one defendant sees the other person is being treated with greater respect or greater acknowledgement, mistatman tainosov, he shuts down. He feels he doesn't present his case properly, and as a result of that, it cannot be a correct verdict because each person has to fully present his position to its fullest. And if the other man feels that he's being discriminated against, he's not going to present his position correctly. Therefore, that's why losake ponim b'mishpat. You can't acknowledge one person, treat one person differently than the other. You can't accept bribery, even if ultimately the judgment is correct. Lishbot Tzedek, I'll give you an example. We had a Gemara in Basra. There's a ruling called Shudid Dedaini. What Shudid Dedaini? It's called the toss of a coin. You have a case, two people come with a deed, and the deed has the same date on it. That Reuven sold this property to Shimon, and Reuven sold the same property to Levi on the same day, and had both documents signed by qualified witnesses, and the transaction concludes at the end of the day. So you have two valid documents. So who did he sell the property? Did he sell to Shimon? Did he sell it to Levi? It's a bona fide document. It's been certified. It's not a forgery. So you don't know. Because both documents close at the end of the day. That's when they take on that value of a transferred document. Mar says it's not resolvable. So one opinion says they divide. The two so-called two people have the deed, they divide the property between the two of them. Another opinion is Shudid Dedaini. The judges have a right just to choose whichever the one they want. They give the property to either Reuven or Shimon, to Shimon or Levi. So Tosfos asks a question. So if it's not based upon any evaluation, so no concept of what? Of conflict of interest has no relevance over here. Because it's not based on who's right, who's wrong. It's up to whatever the dayan chooses. No rhyme or reason. He chooses whoever he wants to give it to. So if that's the case, in that situation, why can't one of the defendants bribe the judge and say, look, it's going to be worth your while to give it to me. Because there, giving the money is not going to alter the evaluation because there's no conflict of interest in that situation. That's Tosa's question. That the only judge that's qualified to give this verdict of Shuda Dadaini, you have to be a qualified Dayan. Let's say you're not a Dayan. You don't make the grade of what Dayan is, you can't give this kind of ruling. A Dayan, to be a Dayan, has to be impartial. It has nothing to do with this particular case. To be able to sit on the court to render a verdict, you have to be impartial. If you're not impartial, you're not qualified to be a Dayan. If that's the case, you can't render this decision. That's the reason why you can't accept bribery. Even though this particular ruling verdict has nothing to do with being impartial, not impartial, but to be able to be classified as a Dayan, you have to be in a position to be impartial. He's not impartial. The Gemara says in Ksubis, what is the meaning of shochad? In Aramaic, the word chad means one. When you accept a bribe or a favor from any one of the defendants, you see it the way that one person sees it. As that person, every person believes he's in the right, the Dayan will take his side because since you accepted something, whether it's an accommodation, whether it's money, whatever it may be, automatically you're as great as you are as a human being, you're affected by it. And because of that, you see it as the person who gave you that bribe, that's shachad. You and that person become one and the same. And you have to be impartial. So you lose your impartiality as a result of taking the bribe from that one person. That's shachad. Bribery blinds the eyes of the wise, visalif divri tzadikim, and it distorts righteous positions. Salif. It corrupts divri tzadikim. We once spoke, it says that Yaakov, when he realized that Esau was coming with 400 men to be open warfare, what did he do? One of the things he sent him a very valuable gift. Flocks of sheep, herds of cattle, many things. Why? So Rashi says, to sate the eye of that evil one. That's why he sent the gift. So the Midrash says, if shochad, if giving bribery blinds the chachamim, the tzaddikim, you can imagine what it does to a person who's a Russia. The person's upright, righteous, devout, the moment he takes any bribery or any favor, he's no longer impartial. So it's a Russia that he lives for the material, there's no question. Offering him the bribe definitely will alter his position, will impact on it. That's the Medrash. Therefore, Yaakov sent this very valuable gift to Esau, that he should not want to kill him. So I explained it. Why is Shochad called Shochad? Shechad. Why did Esau want to kill Yaakov? Because he didn't appreciate who Yaakov was. But if he would have appreciated who Yaakov was, he wouldn't have wanted to kill him. Correct? Because he believed he had his position, Yaakov had his position. But if Yaakov gives him the gift and he takes the gift from Yaakov, what happens to Esau now? Now he becomes one and the same with Yaakov. He has an appreciation for who Yaakov is. He's considering Yaakov as Yaakov. The moment he considers that, he doesn't want to kill Yaakov. That diffuses it immediately. He doesn't want to kill Yaakov. That's shachad. We find in the story, he presents him with the gift, and Esau says, Yeshli Rov. He doesn't want to take the gift. So what does Yaakov do? Vayivtzebo. He insists that he takes it and he took it. I mean, if he offered him the gift, why did Yaakov have to insist he takes the gift? The answer is because if he doesn't take the gift, the bribe hasn't been given. As a result of that, now that you've accepted it, now you see it the way I am. Now it's shechad. It only becomes shechad once you take it. The difference is vayivtzebo. He insisted that he takes it. Once he took it, then he knew he succeeded, or he had a chance that he was going to survive this. I told the story, I think it was yesterday, 2 days ago, Rav Chaim Brisker. Was it on this class that I told the story with the fur coat in the summer? It wasn't this class, it was a different class. You know, Volozhin, Reb Chaim Brisker was the Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin. And he was young, and he was, in terms of who he was, although his family, they were older than he was, but he was the attraction. He had a level of genius and approach. It was something not to be believed. And the government, each yeshiva had to conscript so many students, had to offer so many students. And for years, they were paying off the government, the Ministry of Education, that to turn a blind eye, not to take any students from the Volozhin yeshiva. Reached a point, they said, enough. You have to meet that quota, otherwise we're shutting down the yeshiva. And as much as they tried to change their position, the government's position, they said, no, we're not backing down. They didn't know what to do. So what did Reb Chaim Brisker do? Chaim Brisker says, look, I'll take care of it. He puts on it's the middle of July, he puts on a fur coat, and he goes to the Ministry of Education, and he says to the minister who's in the position to make this kind of decision, he says, and he looks at him, it's about 100 degrees outside, he's wearing a fur coat. So they said, what's going on? He says, don't you realize it's going to snow tomorrow? He says, it's going to snow tomorrow. What are you talking about? He's never heard of anything like it. Reb Chaim says, I'll make a wager. 10,000 ruble. If it snows, you pay me 10,000. And if it doesn't snow, I'll pay you 10,000. So the minister of education said, you got a deal. It's a quick way to make 10,000 ruble. So what happens? Next day comes, of course, it doesn't snow, it's 100 degrees. He said, I got to pay you. Reb Chaim paid him the 10,000 ruble. Reb Chaim comes back, he says, we're exempt. The moment the Minister of Education took that 10,000 ruble, he wasn't bribable. He says, I will not accept a bribe. The moment he took that money from Chaim Brisker, he already had him hoodwinked. Now you'll understand who I am. Now you take on my position. Once that happened, the exemption remained in place. The students were not conscripted. That's shochad. So it's ma'ave ein tzadikim. Okay? My wife claims I told the story yesterday. I did, but it was to a different group. It wasn't to you people. And they all say no. They say you're being very respectful to me, but okay.